What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are back on the Sylvester Stallone train. And as always, to talk about action movies, who else can I bring on this Stallone train other than Max Bryne? Max, how are you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm brilliant, Scott. Thanks for having me on yet again to talk about the man, the myth, the legend, the great Sylvester Stallone, with two more wonderful films from his catalogue. I can't wait to talk about these two. Thanks for having me on again.
No, thanks for doing it. I mean, you're right, because we sort of covered his 80s, some hidden gems from his 80s back catalogue with Nighthawks and Cobra in the last episode. So if you haven't heard it, go back and check it out. We go talk about those underrated films and sort of give our opinion on those. And we're jumping into the 90s with, I think at least one of these is probably a bit more of a mainstay. I think people reference like Cliffhanger in particular a lot more. But we're also going to talk about Daylight, which I think is a massively underrated film. Like, I really enjoy Daylight. And so we're going to talk about these two films. So let's jump in. We shall start in chronological order, as always. 1993, Cliffhanger. So, Max, give us your first thoughts on Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger is a thoroughly entertaining action film. I mean, for a film that's 28 years old this year, there are elements of it that date and everything in this era we live in now, of this sort of the Mission Impossible era, with the wonderful, if it was Tom Cruise doing it, he'd be, throwing himself off the mountains and what have you. But for its age, it really does age really well, I think. The cinematography is fantastic, and there's some of the shots they get of the actual actors on the side of mountain faces and things. It's really good, in pre-CGI times. Well, very primitive CGI times, I should say, at this point. Very primitive. It works really well. I think it stands up great. It's just, you don't have to think too much about it. You can just go in and enjoy it. It's 2 hours, or just shy of 2 hours. Great story. Some really good actors in the cast as well, which we'll get to. Really good supporting cast. Great cast of villains as well. It's good. It's a really good film. Did you find it stood up to the sort of test of time?
Yes, yeah. I think this film really does stand up to the time, and for key reasons, like you say, is the amount of practical effects they've done in this is so good. Like, I had a quick look at it, and like you said, there's a bit of blue screen in some places, and understandable, but yeah, not to be topped by, like you say, the amount of shots that clearly are on the side of a cliff face. Like, Stallone did, like, a lot of the stunts, and they went out and did stuff on cliff faces on the top of mountains. So that I applaud. Like, it stands up. It's impressive to watch. It's beautiful to watch. Like, some of the cinematography in this is really good, and the action direction from Rennie Harlin stands up as well. I'm a big fan of Rennie Harlin. Around this time, we also did Long Kiss Goodnight, Samuel L. Jackson and Gina Davis. So I'm a big fan of that sort of thing. So yeah, no, I think this film really stands up. The other thing as well to note is, like, this was a big film for Stallone. Like, he'd had a bit of a run of not quite stinkers, but, like, from 1990, he had Rocky V, Oscar, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Yeah.
So he wasn't sort of hitting that sort of, I think, at that point there was that thing, and so this really gets him back on that action train, and it's a really good, it's a proper sort of milestone for in that sense. And as you say, the cast in this are great. There's even some surprises for any English viewers of our age, I suppose, and that may have been watching daily soaps, or at least weekly soaps at the time. Because not only you get Sylvester Stallone, you've got Michael Rooker, you've got John Lithgow, you've then got Craig Fairbrass.
yes, Cockney legend Craig Fairbrass.
Yeah, EastEnders, from the 90s, sort of like, yeah. And I often forget he's in this. And then when he pops up, I'm like, oh yeah, like you're in this. That's quite cool. So Yeah, no, it's a cracking film. As it's an overview. I can see why. Well, no, it's one of those that's like I think it should be appreciated more. I do think people should talk about it more. And because it is such a good film, but I sometimes wonder people don't seem to talk about it often, or at least it's dropped off the radar, which I think is strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's not sort of a quote unquote household name kind of film, is it? And certainly when people talk about Stallone, obviously they default to the blockbuster franchises, and the Rockies, the Rambo, I suppose in Morris times the Expendables as well. Those are the things that people know him for. And you talk about other Stallone films, then it tends to come up in conversation. But I think for me, it hits everything you're looking for in a 90s action film, or just in an action film in general. Really, it's got something of a story, and he's quite his character isn't completely one-dimensional, which I suppose we'll get to. This character does fail, especially in the opening, quite harrowing opening scene in this film, which every time I watch it my palms start to sweat. It's quite something, but yeah, and it has it all. It's mostly good performances. Again, when we talk about the opening scene, there is one stinker of a performance in that opening scene, which we'll I'll divulge in a second. But it's a really good film. It's got loads of great stunts and explosions, some decent one-liners, a fantastic mustache twirling villain in the shape of John Lithgow, who goes very big in his performance. He knows what it is, doesn't he? When he's playing this part, Lithgow, he knows he's getting well paid. It's a blockbuster movie, and this is not Shakespeare in the Park. So he goes big style with his performance.
He's one of my favorite. John Lithgow is just one of those actors that throughout some of my younger life, like he just popped up, and I don't think I knew who he was. Like I always think of like this film. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Santa Claus the movie. With Dudley Moore and that, and a couple of things, and then sort of it wasn't until Third Rock from the Sun, just like I think a late 90s sort of sitcom that I really got to know him. And then whenever he pops up in things now, I'm just like, yes, I just like John Lithgow. Like he's just a really good presence in so many things. So yeah, he's great in this. The one thing as well is this, that you say about the plot of this film. This film sort of falls into that early 90s Die Hard inner.
Honor, mountain.
In this case, honor. So it's sort of this very much falls into that sort of Die Hard trope of the underdog against a sort of not terrorist in this case. It's sort of it's thieves. They're after money.
Thieves,
So it falls into that. And the thing is, I'm not going to complain. I like that formula, but it very much does that. But more than some of those others, they're not going to ever diss Die Hard because I think that sort of gives enough backstory. This film at least tries to give you not only a bit of a setup but a backstory as well, to try and give those characters a little bit of dimension. Not much, but go on. Hit us. You were talking before about the opening scene of this film.
Yes. So
first and foremost, let's just have a quick chat about it, and then you can divulge the stinker that the performance.
So the opening scene of this film, the opening 10 minutes or so, is set 8 months in the past, because after this opening scene, little caption pops up saying 8 months later, which is where the rest of the film takes place. So this prologue, if you will, is a scene in the past where you get Stallone and his sort of best friend and co-mountain rescuer, played by the wonderful Michael Rooker. Stallone is Gabe Walker, and Hal Tucker is Rooker's character.
Love these action hero names.
Tucker and Walker. So Hal has gone, I guess on his day off, taking his girlfriend Sarah up, climbing up a mountain, and they've got stuck up there because Hal's blown his knee out, and so obviously Stallone and his co-workers have to go and get them down. They're not there dying, but they're up there stuck. So he has to go and rescue them, and that leads to that wonderful opening shot where the camera pans round this sort of really high, narrow, I guess you call it a mountain that they're on the top of. It's just a really narrow column, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a column of rock, isn't it, that they've climbed up?
I know.
I wasn't entirely sure how you'd get down from that in the first place, or climb up it for that matter. I'm in no shape to be climbing that.
No, it's insane. But the way the sort of helicopter shot pans around this, and you see sat on top of it, it's clearly Michael Rooker sat there.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know the actress's name that plays Sarah. She's not really in it long enough for me to look her up. But it's clearly them sat there.
Yeah.
It's not stunt doubles and it's not CGI. They're clearly sat on it. So how, that just boggles my mind that they would sit there with the flare waiting for Gabe to show up. And obviously we get this scene where he has to. They have the chopper pilot Frank and Jesse, who you discover is Stallone's girlfriend, and they sort of park the chopper on top of another sort of peak, if you will, and they run a rescue line across. And Stallone, having climbed up to the top to meet Hal, they have to sort of rappel across.
Yeah, you talk about the sort of the shot, the Spanish, and again, because there's quite a few of those in that film. They do some really fantastic photography in this. But in addition to Michael Rooker being sat in there is a shot that it pans round, and it's of Stallone climbing up a rock face, like almost sort of like upside down and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's pretty damn impressive.
It is, isn't it? It's like there's no. I mean, maybe they've digitally removed the ropes or something like that. Could they even do that in those days? I really don't know. But they're literally hanging off, aren't they? It's quite something, really. Cruise would be proud, I think. But yeah, so you get obviously they have to rappel across this thing. So Rooker goes across safe and sound, and then it's his girlfriend's turn while Sly's going to be the last to go over. And obviously, as she's halfway, her sort of buckle on her harness just basically snaps for no apparent reason, and she's basically going to fall to her impending doom. So Sly ignores what Rooker suggests because there's no time for anything else. Sly just basically rappels out on the line to try and lift her off by hand. And there's this wonderful shot of Rooker on the other end of the wire, sort of sat on this sort of lip of the chopper going, "Don't you drop a man, don't you drop a Gabe," and all this. And the old geezer, the chopper pilot Frank, I think he's called, who's obviously like their co-worker, he's sort of stood next to Michael Rooker. And if you watch it, I implore everyone to watch it, this shot. Like, it's just like serious shit. Like this poor girl is about to die, and it's Rooker's girlfriend. So Rooker's like, "Oh my God, don't drop it, Gabe, don't drop it." And Frank is laughing, literally.
I've never noticed that.
Seriously, watch the shot. When we finish recording this, just go back and watch that scene. I beg you, please. Frank is literally like, he must have not realized what the scene was, or the direction wasn't there, or he didn't realize the camera's roll. He maybe thought it was a rehearsal, like blocking shot, camera setups. Or maybe that was all they had, and he's literally like going like this, like literally laughing and smiling. This old guy, it's bonkers. I've spotted that the very first time I watched it, and every time I watch it since, I wait for it. I have to point it out to my other half every time I say, "Look at that," and she's like, "Every time." I
will check that out straight away after recording this, and I implore everybody listening to this to go and check it out. That's amazing. I've never spotted that. I'll have to check that out.
Please do, everyone do. You'll be glad you did. But it's not. But on a more serious note, it's a good scene because it, it's a tragic opening and sets up the tale for 8 months later, where Hal can't possibly forgive him because he blames him for a death, and Gabe sort of lost his edge and on his nerve for climbing mountains, so was decamped somewhere else, like working elsewhere. I can't remember where he says he's working. So they're in sort of at odds with each other, but obviously the narrative of the film brings them sort of through necessity having to work together again, and obviously rekindling that respect and friendship by the end of the film. But what an opening scene! That is tense.
It is, and that moment, because like you say, that scene, it's like you say, damp palms time with all some of that stuff. But the moment that he's holding on to her, and he's off that rappelling line, and like you see that it's slipping, and then she goes, like, it makes my stomach drop. Like, because again, practical effects, like I'm assuming it's not a person, like I'm assuming it's a dummy or something, but like they show a body dropping, and you sort of like, that's a long way down. That is, it's really well done, and like I say, it sets up this film well. Like I say, it's I like the fact that it shows, not tells, because they'll say other films could have gone, that's an expensive shot. Do you know what? We're not going to do that. We'll just have it in dialogue later, and we'll let why they're at odds or whatever.
Yeah.
But and the other thing as well, it sort of sets up the tone of the film that you get. Like, if that's the opening, like, what else are they going to do in this film? And
Absolutely,
so it really does set it up really nicely, I think.
Yeah, it does. It establishes Sly as someone who's failed as well, and her death sort of looms large over him, and he can't forgive himself, let alone being forgiven by everyone else. And it kind of adds a bit of weight to his character, really, rather than him being this alpha male mountain climber, jacked up kind of guy, who can't lose. He loses in the worst way at the very start of the film. So it gives his character a little bit more depth, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's it. I think you see that he is decisive. Like, not, I wouldn't say impulsive. That might be sort of, but he's decisive. He's like, no, this is the only way we've got to do it. I've got to go do this. He makes a bad call and it doesn't pan out. But yeah, I like the fact that, like I said, this is early 90s. I think we're sort of coming out of the sort of alpha super action hero. Like we're going into the sort of like the more, the more real, this is you say he failed. He's not like the rogue mountain climber that always gets it done no matter what kind of thing. Like, no, it went wrong and he's got to deal with that, and it comes back to play later on. And I like the fact, like you say, that it then builds up those relationships and those moments of tension, especially between him and Rooker. And I think Rooker's really good in this.
He's excellent, yeah.
And there's several scenes later on. Like there's one where they've got Rooker, and he's they're sort of playing on the sort of the older sort of like their sort of relationship, and sort of like not to mention in joke, but in sort of inside baseball kind of knowledge of certain things and stuff, like like calling something for them to he's like, he knows what he's talking about, but like not take him literally and what he's saying. But yeah, all that sort of plays out really well because you've seen this opening scene, you've got that knowledge of where they've come from. And so yeah, it's an opener, it's a real grabber. And the other thing is, it allows you then the time to build up to the rest.
Yeah.
Because then you sort of get the other half of the sort of the scenario is I'm not even sure where the money. I can't remember where the money's come from. It's irrelevant, really. It's a large quantity of money and all this other stuff.
It's $100 million being transferred from the US Treasury, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in useless bills that you can't spend. But if you have the right contacts or something, you could move it somehow.
You could bank it, basically. That was the idea. Turn it in, it's sort of, I think it's basically turn it from paper money into non-paper money, and that way they can they can use it.
Yeah.
But the whole thing seems irrelevant because basically it's a setup for them to lose the money. Because it's you've had the climbing thing, and you're now getting this mid-air heist.
It's really good as well. Those are that's a genuine line attaching those two planes.
Again,
not CGI'd in.
No, we are back to these practical effects and these two planes and this whole sort of setup.
Yeah,
and it's really well done. Again, and you're just like, and it goes pear-shaped, and they lose the money, and it falls into the mountains, and they've got to go after it. But like that could have been a film like in and of itself. Passenger 57 or Air Force One, one of those other sort of on a plane kind of sort of scenarios. And so but like in this, but what's funny is when I was watching it this time, the thing that sprang to mind was The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, the opening scene.
Yeah, and everyone goes mad for that. Oh, it was filmed in IMAX. And it looks really cool. But watching this, I was like, Rennie Harlan beat them to it. Like,
yeah, 20 years beforehand.
Yeah, to a really cool, like a really cool sort of mid-air heist. So I was really impressed with that. I often forget like little bits in this film. Like, oh yeah, that happens. So, and again, it's like it's not even one of the things I say about the plane heist, and a lot of this film is sort of not only is it really cool stunt work, that it's all practical. You see the stuff going on. Is some of the this, I think it's only like a 15 over here, but the violence in this film is pretty in your face. Like it's all quite close quarters, and that shooting on the plane, all other stuff. It's not, was it brutal or bloody, but it's pretty like it's efficient and in your face. And definitely. So But what are your thoughts on the plane heist though? Anything else?
I think it's great because it's easy to say it now because I've watched it Christ knows how many times over the last 28 years, but that at first you don't think the turncoat treasury agent Travers is the one who's going to be the inside man. You think it's the guy who they've just introduced to literally joining the plane. There's this outside man who's not part of the team, who I think he comes from the FBI or something like this, whatever he is, and they get introduced to him before the flight, and they're all like, oh, who's this guy, and then he's the first one to pull a gun when the sort of hijacker plane starts to appear. So and he says, right, I'm taking control of this plane. So you think initially he's the one who's going to start gunning everyone down, and then seemingly out of nowhere, Travers kills his two friends and co-workers, and then kills him, and then obviously the pilot's in on it as well. So it's quite a shocking scene because you really don't see that coming. But it's quite cool, obviously, with the way they transfer these three massive, like, bulky cases full of bills across on this washing line, if you will, from one plane to the other, and then one of them, they have to rappel across it as well to get to the other plane. But it's very cool. It's tense because you think those cases are going to go, something's going to go wrong, but it works really well. It works really well, and you get to obviously see what a ruthless kind of guy Lithgow's character is Eric Quaylen, where one of his guys takes because obviously the guy who you think's the inside man who isn't, you think he's dead, but then he gets up and manages to sort of take their plane out with his machine gun, and one of the villains gets shot, and Lithgow's like, we need to get him to a hospital fast, and just chucks him off the plane. That's the quickest way, straight down he'll go down. But he just establishes him, and you get to meet his crew of his colourful cast of diverse characters. Yes, in that crew, with obviously we've talked about the wonderful Craig Fairbrass. Then you've got the guy who was the guy at Cool Runnings as well, who's the Jamaican character in the cruise, a real piece of work as well. The woman, the English lady. I'm never quite sure whether Lithgow is trying to play. Is he supposed to be an Englishman himself? The accent's a little all over the place. It is. I'm not sure. It's almost like he's gone, well, all these other villains have been European, so I shall be general, sort of maybe European, but it's something like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's really unclear. They never established, because when they sort of know it's him, they go, yeah, he's like former military intelligence, and he's a ruthless guy, and he's this, he's that, but they never actually say where he's from, But I always think with Lithgow himself, his accent, although he has an American accent, of course, the way he speaks almost has like an almost English twang to it. He has a very eloquent talking voice on and off camera, and it almost is like a quasi English American accent he has, isn't it? I agree with that, actually. And he plays it up, in all these other roles. But he's so fun to watch. But you're right. I love the fact that within the first 20 minutes, probably, you've had like the opening scene with this, with this tragic accident that's happened that sort of establishes the relationships that come later in the film, and then you've got this mid-air heist. And like I say, so this film really does belt at a pace. Because then obviously it moves on to, right, now we've got to find these bags, because the bags sort of fall. They've all got trackers on them. So basically they're trying to track them. Yeah. And it's like, oh, we can't traverse these mountains. We need someone to help us do it. We need these mountain trackers. And so they call in a false call for rescue. And basically Michael Rooker's the one that's going to go up to sort of follow the call. Then it all goes a bit pear-shaped, and then they're sort of... It's all this. It comes like what I like to call movie coincidences. It's like we have the main hero, and now we have to have him sort of like roll into the action at some point. He just happens to be back in town after 8 months to come and collect the rest of his shit and try and get his girlfriend to come back with him. Just happens to be there on that day. Yeah, exactly. So you get the series of coincidences. And then you sort of get Stallone on the mountain, and that's when sort of like the action starts to kick off. But not kick off, because again, like just carry on, like because you do get like a series of stunts. You get two guys that are sort of like base jumping off mountains, and
who get shot the fuck later on, which is really sort of like, you know, again, like I sometimes forget that. And then this time watching, I was like, oh yeah, like you two are like fodder in this film, like you guys. But yeah, when they go up on the mountain and stuff, like I say, it becomes. I wasn't a slightly different film, but like the tone doesn't change. But like you say, it takes that turn to becoming that sort of like the Die Hard sort of film. Everything's set up, and now it's the chase.
Yeah.
So you know, what are your thoughts on the sort of the setup of getting them onto the mountain? Does it work for you, or is it a bit too?
No, it does. It does work because obviously there has to be a practical reason for them to have to be there, and obviously, like you said, they can't. These villains can't go mountain climbing with no mountain climbing gear and no mountain climbing expertise or knowledge of the mountains themselves. So it works. I mean, obviously, it's tenuous that Stallone would be there and would be quite easily persuaded into joining in as well, despite saying no, I'm done. I've lost my nerve. I'm done. He hates me, wants to kill me anyway. And at one point, he actually holds him, doesn't he? When they first meet, which is the first time in 8 months, Rooker holds him over the edge of the cliff, and someone's like, "Do it if you want to do it, you know." But obviously, he says, "No, you live with it. You live with it," because he hates him that much. He thinks, you know, killing him would sort of free him from his guilt. You live with the guilt the rest of your life, you know. But no, it's a plausible reason. I mean, I suppose one could say that these sort of, you know, you've got Lithgow's character Quaylen, who's this, you know, crack military intelligence. He is a psychopath, but you know, he's supposed to be like a genius operator. And you've got these crack mercenaries who are obviously with him there for their payday. They do seem to get quite easily overpowered by Stallone every time he has to come up against one of them. And you know, he's obviously a tough, big jacked up guy. Of course he is. He's sliced alone, but at the end of the day, he's a mountain rescue guy. He's not a trained fighter, or you know, they don't sort of throw in some backstory that he's an expert in martial arts or anything like this, or ex-Navy SEAL or something.
That's the thing I was going to say. That's the thing that always seems missing to me. Like, because there's a scene later on, quite a bit later, and I think it's when he takes out like the Jamaican guy, and he sort of hides under the snow in a crevice, you know, and then he sort of pulls him through and does all that sort of thing. I was like, that's very John Rambo, which is fine because it looks cool. But like I say, a lot of these guys, like you say, whenever you watch these films, you know, they usually they've got like some military training. Like he was in Special Forces, he was in the SEALs, he's an Army Ranger. There's something, but in this, it's just like, no, he's just a really good climber.
Yeah.
Yet he sort of becomes an absolute badass later on.
It's you have to suspend your disbelief, I suppose.
And I'm happy to do that. It is just a sort of like, it's almost like a little nitpick that, and the reason I'm nitpicking is because so much of this film is good. Like I'm enjoying everything, but it's I think as you sort of become more sort of used to these kinds of films, you sort of expect it because they've got to give, especially more as you get into the 90s, they've got to give a justification as to why all of a sudden this fire chief or this postman, I don't know, is all of a sudden like a badass. I mean, the only other example I can think of is another Die Hard inner is Sudden Death.
Oh yeah, Van Damme,
Van Damme, and it's in that. It's sort of like, you know, he's a fire chief or he's a fire marshal or something in that, and then all of a sudden it's like, but he was also in the military for this and this. It sort of gives that, you know, you go, oh okay, I'm fine with it then. You know, you've given me enough justification to accept why, you know, he's an absolute badass with all these weapons.
They could have maybe slipped, served in Nam or something like that, but
it's really, I say, overall it's irrelevant. It's not a massive thing. It just watching it this time, I was a bit like, oh yeah, that sort of becomes a cliche down the line that, you know, hasn't quite formed yet.
No. He does manage to cheat death on multiple occasions, though, doesn't he? I mean, when they send him after the first place, they take his jacket and gear off him and make him climb the snowy mountain in just a t-shirt. I mean, and he somehow manages to make it to this cabin in just a t-shirt to rendezvous with his other half, Jesse, I think her name is, and he would have frozen to death. And then there's another point where he ends up going under the ice in the frozen water with no top on, just bare chested, and you know, manages to sort of come out of that with no long-lasting adverse effects as well.
I love the fact that when he does climb up with the t-shirt as well, because again, it's all great. Like, it's a great tense moment. Like, he finds the shack and he breaks in, and he's sort of shivering, and they've got him there, and he's wet, and he's sort of like, she puts something around him to try and sort of warm him up a bit. And what he does, he smashes the glass and pulls out a jumper.
Yeah, and that's all he wears for the rest of the film. No coat,
no coat.
Jumper.
And I'm not even entirely sure he dries at any point, because he's still so you're like, all right. But again, like you say, I'm fine with it. It's, it's a bit silly, but it's fine. Because this film comes down to for me is the stunts. As you get into the film, like, you see the stuff, and again, like, you can call them out. Like, some of it's set. Like, I think when you see him climbing the side of that mountain with the snow, obviously, because they wouldn't do that in a real mountain face, and those sorts of bits, and the end bit where he goes underwater, they're clearly sets, and they look like sets. And again, like, you're fine. I don't want them to risk Stallone's life for a shot. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the one I love, which is all done outside and clearly is done somewhere on a mountaintop, I assume, because he's got the mountains all behind it, is the bridge.
Yeah, the blowing up of the rope bridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is all over the trailer, like, and you watch it, but it's one of these shots where, and I'm not sure who did the cinematography for this, and I'd have to call him out at some point, but with Rennie Harlin, obviously the director, whenever they get a chance to really show off the surrounding, to go, oh, just so you know, we're on the top of the world.
Yeah. And
they do these like panning shots, and you just see over the edge of a cliff, and you've got the cliffs in the distance, constantly doing that, and you're just like, yeah, no, this shot is amazing. Like, it looks really good. And then that sort of shot with the bridge, is so well done.
Oh, it is, yeah. I mean, the film's full of those kind of great shots. I mean, it's supposed to be in the Colorado Rockies or something like that, but it was actually filmed in Italy, this film, the majority of it anyway.
Oh, was it?
All the mountain stuff was filmed in, I don't know which range in Italy, but that's where it was filmed. The majority of it anyway. Obviously, like you said, there's some set stuff and things like this, which probably would have been shot in a soundstage and that. But yeah, all the outdoor stuff is in Italian mountain range, but obviously you know it's not too sort of distinguished from any other, so you buy that it's supposed to be in Colorado.
It's rocky and snowy. It'll do. I mean, that's sort of. I didn't know it was in Italy. It looked perfectly, more than acceptable to me. Just going to call that cinematographer was a gentleman called Alex Thompson.
Well, bravo to Alex Thompson is all I can say. Yeah. I mean, he is. I'll have to see what else he's done, and
I'm just looking now. So just to call out, so he did other notable films. He actually did Demolition Man same year.
All right. Yeah.
And Alien 3, but he also did the Craze with the twins.
The Kemp brothers. Yeah.
Kemp brothers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Series of things in it. Yeah. Legend, Labyrinth.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of stuff. A lot of good stuff actually. So yeah, did a lot of stuff. So, but I just wanted to shout him out for this film because it's well done, Mr. Thompson.
Oh yeah, because a lot of that would have been sort of hanging off the side of a helicopter and things like this, or really close to the edge of mountain drops and things like this. So he and Rennie, obviously, you said Rennie Harlin, the director, they for me are the stars of the show of this film.
Yeah, they did such a good job.
Stallone's brilliant in it, as he always is, charismatic and looks a million bucks. And like we said, Lithgow's a brilliant villain. Michael Rooker's a great character. But the star of the show is what you see on the screen. It costs a lot of money, but they put it all on the screen, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think the thing we need to keep shouting out about is this was made in 93, or it was at least released in 93. So made probably through 92, 93. And the fact of the matter is, like, some of the shots that they get now, like you and I could probably get, not in a mountain range, but you can get, because you've got drones, you've got drones and you've got CGI and you can do all this kind of stuff. None of that for this. Like this film, like you said, this has got some poor sod on a harness hanging out of a helicopter getting a shot.
Yeah.
And so, that needs, I think that, it's worth mentioning that. And I just think, like you say, you're totally right, 100%, that some of the cinematography in this film is totally the star. And like, so some of the shots and stuff, that's what it stands for. And even at the end, like, they have that sort of, don't know, that sort of thing of, which is a little typical of, like, it pans out the helicopter shot of them sort of having survived and stuff. So you get all that kind of bits and pieces. But yeah, no, it's definitely worth shouting out about.
Yeah. He's a great director, Rennie Harlin, isn't he? I mean,
yes.
he must. I don't know what's happened to him. Really, he's kind of fallen off the radar in recent years in terms of making the big budget stuff. But I mean, in the 90s, he obviously had this. He'd done Die Hard 2 a couple of years before this, of course. And like you said, Long Kiss Goodnight, great film. He did what was the one with the Deep Blue Sea, the one with the sharks. That's a great film.
Yes. Yeah.
But in recent years, I very rarely see his name cropping anywhere, really, which is a shame, because he as a visual action-oriented director, he's up there with anyone in that 90s era, at least. He was delivering cutting-edge stuff back then, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm looking at his back catalogue, and you get, like, all right, he did Cutthroat Island, like I said, but he did Long Kiss Goodnight, Deep Blue Sea. He did Driven, which is another Stallone film.
Stallone, yeah.
He did one of the Exorcist prequels, 12 Rounds with John Cena, which isn't a terrible film. That's 2019.
Yeah.
But there's then all of a sudden it's become sort of like TV kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of, although recently, and this is actually something that came up, someone mentioned it to me recently. It's a film called Skip Trace. It's Johnny Knoxville and Jackie Chan. And apparently it's pretty good.
Right.
So, yeah, his career seems to have sort of like fizzled a little bit. But as you say, that Rennie Harlin was a person to notice in the 90s. It was one of those.
Yeah. If you saw his name on the poster, on the marquee or something, you would think, oh, this is going to be a thrilling, action-packed ride, which this film is. He had it all back then. It's a real shame he didn't sort of go on to be, that household name kind of action director like some of the others did of that era. It's a shame. It really is.
It really is. Finished director. So he's sort of, but yeah, I'm glad we're getting to call him out anyway. But so well done for Cliffhanger, Rennie. Well done if you're listening. Saying well done to you. But I think one of the things, just to round out on this sort of on Cliffhanger, is the sort of the fighting and the violence and this sort of thing. We talked about sort of the gunplay at the very beginning, but one of the things I do love is how the setups for the fights, like they use the environment as well. Like, when they're in the cave, and is it the bats, and then they drag the guy down, and there's a great bit which is so Stallone, or it's sort of like a hangover from an 80s action film. He pushes him up onto the stalactite. Ultimate Warrior guerrilla press style. And it's because it's a good fight, because, like I say again, this isn't well, I suppose they got their ass beaten a bit, but he gets his ass handed to him quite handily for a short time in this cave by this dude, and then he overpowers him and lifts him up and bench presses him into a stalactite. Like it's again, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I'm down with that. That's badass. But they do, like, all the fights in this are actually pretty good. The ice hook. Is it to Craig Fairbrass who gets the ice?
Craig Fairbrass is when he's on the edge of the cliff with Michael Rooker, and he starts saying, he's like, "Do you like soccer? I was a fucking good striker," and then starts booting him about, and then doing like football commentary while he's doing it, like saying, "Lines the ball up," and all this. And then he, I think Rooker gets a blade and like kind of slashes him, and then pulls his shotgun and shoots him at point blank, and he goes off the end of the cliff. But again, great death scene. He doesn't have a lot to say in it, Craig Fairbrass, but when he's on it, he comes out with some good sort of Cockney one-liners, and I like him in this. I do. I think he's really good in this. I so hope. I don't know when he was on EastEnders, and I seem to remember it was around this time. I so hope he turned up on set and was like, "Yeah, I've had some time off. I've been working on a film with Stallone," giving it all that. Because it's a good one. He's still working all the time, Fairbrass. He stars in a lot of these sort of British gangster films. These Endless Rise of the Foot Soldier films. He's in all of those, isn't he? And all these East End hard man kind of movies. He's in all of them. So he's very much still acting. And
Fair play to him.
His output's very prolific today.
Found his niche. So if you can find it, fair play to him.
Yeah.
But anything else then to mention on Cliffhanger?
One thing I did look for was if they ever sort of discussed making a sequel, and apparently they did. A couple of years later, they'd planned to make a sequel, and they were going to call it Cliffhanger 2: The Dam, which would have had Stallone back as Gabe Walker, this time fighting terrorists who've taken over Hoover Dam. As you do, you could have some great climbing and hanging sequences on Hoover Dam, and apparently Stallone was interested, and they did some developmental work on it, but it just got cancelled in the end. They just decided it wasn't worth it. But apparently over the years, obviously now he's far too old to be doing it, but in a good decade or so after that, Stallone had said he would be happy to come back and do a sequel to the film, but it just never got off the ground, which is a shame because it's you could have upped the ante even more in the second one.
Oh yeah.
You've got to, haven't you, basically? So they could have come out with, especially as technology and techniques got more advanced towards the end of the 90s or even the early 2000s, they could have really upped the ante with him doing some crazy shit and stuff like this. But it never happened, which is a shame. And obviously it's never going to happen now unless they did. I suppose they could do a remake or of some sorts now, cast some young buff action guy in the role.
I was going to say, because they've done it before where I've seen plenty of sequels. In fact, I looked at, talking about the action films, I was looking at Hard Target earlier, and again, the Jean-Claude Van Damme film.
Yeah.
And there's a Hard Target 2 that came out in like 2015, 2016.
No way.
And yeah, it's not Jean-Claude Van Damme at all. It's Scott Adkins.
I like Scott Adkins. Yeah,
he's good. He is. He's really good. But like they've gone a completely different direction. Like it might as well be a completely different film. Like or a completely different sort of series. But you can do that sort of thing. Cliffhanger 2, where you like you say, set up a different star to do it all over again. That'd be quite cool. But yeah, obviously, I'd watch it. Yeah. But obviously, the fact of the matter is, it stands alone as a sort of a standalone Stallone film, which is why we're doing it in this little mini retrospective. But yeah, I didn't know they thought about that. But talking of dams, and
nice segue.
So there you go. Next to dams are bridges or tunnels, even. So
yes,
let's move from Cliffhanger in 1993 to 3 years later, 1996, Daylight, and a very different Stallone film. He's sort of leaning into sort of like this is like the action disaster film, really, isn't it? I mean, they were going big again at the time. You had like I often think that the Volcano 2 and other disaster sort of films was like Armageddon and even like the disaster porn of Independence Day. Like they were a big thing in the sort of the mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
But Daylight's another one that I have always loved. Like I've always been a fan of this. I had it on VHS. Then I've had it on DVD, and then I've got it on Blu-ray. Like, I've always had like this film. I don't know why, and I probably struggle to articulate why I like this film so much.
Yes, I'd love to know why.
I don't know, to be honest. There's just something about it that, like, I think part of it is I do like disaster films. I'm a mug for a disaster film, and I'm like, oh, Stallone's in a disaster film. That's cool. It's like a happy go-to film for some reason. Like, I know quite, you sort of watch this film, you're like, yeah, this is just sort of, it fits into that mold.
Yeah.
It doesn't need he's a former, SAS or sort of former Navy SEAL kind of thing, because there's so little fighting in it. It's about survival. Yeah. But it's just a cracking film. I think some of the special effects in this is good, but just to give an overview, then the film basically is one of the New York tunnels. There's basically they're cutting corners to get rid of some I can't remember what it was.
Toxic waste or
toxic
something,
waste and
isn't it?
something basically.
Yeah.
And then during that there was a road traffic accident which then results in an explosion at both ends of the tunnel, and that's because of one end of the tunnel sort of happening, they have to close the other end of the tunnel, so these people then are all trapped inside this tunnel, and there's some that have escaped, but as they're doing it, they realize that they've completely cut off the air, so they've only got so much air in there, and the water's going to start rising and all so on and so forth. It's a real sort of disaster movie setup, and you get some really cool, there's a whole great sequence of it all happened. The car crash is actually quite a cool sequence, but there was a gentleman again, this who had a failure and who lost his job. Sylvester Stallone who is coming back. He's called back into action, and they start talking about how they can get the people out of the tunnel. And you do get like the military intervention and the sort of like the emergency services intervention, but then he's like, no, the only way is to go in through this fan duct, and I shall lower myself in, and then I shall get the people out from there. Which even when he's describing it on the model, they get out like I'm with everybody else when they're like, this is so not going to work. Like this is such a bad idea. But he does. He ends up getting into the tunnel and then works with the people to find their way out. And it's like a ragtag bunch of people. There's a group of juvenile criminals, an old couple and their dog, a tunnel warden, I suppose, tunnel watch guard, and a series of couple of other bit of family with a young girl. And then they work together to get out of the tunnel. One of the things I didn't even know until today is one of the criminals is Sage Stallone. So a bit of nepotism going on in there.
Yeah, for the second time, because he played his son in Rocky V about 6 years earlier, hadn't he?
Yeah.
Sadly passed away as well in more recent years. It's a damn shame. He was
It
not a
is.
bad actor, was he?
No, he was all right. You know, sort of got his start, and why not? You know, if you're Dan Stallone, why not? Sort of.
I don't Stallone. I'd insist in being in all his bloody films.
Exactly. Yeah, get your foot in the door. Why not?
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
But yeah, they're all good. You know, so you have this group, this sort of mismatched group, and they eventually sort of they work their way out the tunnel. But during that, a number of things happen. Viggo Mortensen turns up in it, as that's the thing I was going to mention. Doesn't last long, but he's he's basically Gabe Walker from the last film.
Like, yeah, kind of, isn't he? A twattish Gabe Walker. Yeah.
And then they eventually sort of get out, and it's all very dramatic, and it ends in usual fashion, you know, sort of the heroic fashion at the end. It's actually, I will admit, there's a moment in this film that even though I know it's coming, and even though it's incredibly cheesy, every time it fucking gets me. Not proper, like, you know, choked up, but when they have to leave the guy to drown.
The tunnel guard. Yeah, he's basically breaks his neck.
He breaks.
So he's paralyzed, tied to a board, can't move.
Yeah. And this again comes back to the direction, because they don't cut away. There's not sort of like, we've got to leave him, and they leave. They go, we've got to leave him, and then they leave, and then it cuts back to him with the water going over him. I'm like, oh shit! Like they're gonna show us, and they sort of they give you enough to go like, oh yeah, this isn't good. So yeah, it sort of you know, it's tonally, I think this film is a little imbalanced, because it does go for some lighter moments, but then it really does hit you with some of the other bits and pieces as well. So, but I mean, I've gone on long enough. That's what the film is. What are your initial thoughts then on Daylight?
I realized I'd only ever seen this film once, and that was when it was out. So I have watched it just recently, obviously for the purpose of this. It's on Netflix at the moment, UK Netflix. I don't know about international Netflix. So it's on there, so everyone should check it out. So I watched it the other last week, in fact, for the first time in, I guess, 20-something years. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's like you said, it's a good, solid, well-made disaster movie. You know, they spend a bit of money on it. It's not cheap and cheerful. It's it's not your typical Stallone film. It could have been anybody playing that part. Let's be honest. I did read somewhere that the director Rob Cohen initially wanted Nick Cage to do it, but the studio thought Nick Cage was too much of an everyman, not an action guy, which is ironic because it's the same year The Rock came out, and the year after was Con Air. Nick Cage was just about to start his action hero phase. So yeah, I'm sure Nick Cage would have been fine, but and Stallone is more than fine, but it's not a typical Stallone part, is it? Like you said, there's no villain in this film. There's no. I think definitely this. I don't know if I'm right, but probably by this point anyway, it's probably the first action film Stallone had been in where he didn't have a villain to face off with. There is no villain in this film. There's no physical obstacle. Well, there is, but not a person. I mean, it's escaping.
Yeah, and I like the fact that even despite that, the climax of this film tries to give him like that moment. There's a bit he has the C4, like the explosives, because he's going to blow part of the tunnel to try and to clear some things out. And it has him sort of like shouting at the tunnel and like those lampings, like Semtex into the mud and stuff. And you're like, so they want to give him that almost like him versus it's him versus the situation, isn't it? Him versus the sort of like the tunnel.
Yeah.
They do. They want to keep trying to have those slight action cliches, but like you said, there's no sort of Hans Gruber or,
No.
Kind of figure in this one. It's there's no villain of the piece.
No, not really. The closest you get is Viggo Mortensen's character, who's a bit of a knob, but he's not a bad person, is he? At the end of the day,
No.
He's one of the few that most of the characters you only meet for the first time in the tunnel. But do you get? I think the Stallone, the leading lady character, who's like a sort of down on the luck playwright living in a rat-infested apartment. So she's going to be a big player because you're seeing her story before the tunnel. And the third one is Viggo Mortensen. So his demise, in a way, being, like you said, he doesn't last long. It's a bit of a shocker, really, because you think, well, he's going to be around because he's a. I suppose this is pre-Lord of the Rings, Viggo Mortensen, so he wasn't a big name, but he was. He'd been around. He'd done a few things. His face in some stuff. So you think, well, he's going to be around, and you see he's this like extreme sports entrepreneur kind of guy. Obviously owns like this big sporting dynasty or something like this, is a celebrity basically, isn't he? He's famous, so he's he wants to escape, but he's getting people to film him doing it because it's going to make great footage for his adverts and things like this. And he clearly ignores Stallone's advice when he's trying to, which leads to his demise. So he's not a bad person, but he's a bit of a douchebag. So he kind of is the de facto person you're not rooting for. But everyone else, then there's like you said, there's a bit of everyone in there, all different backgrounds and ethnicities and that, and you're rooting for all of them, really. You want them all to escape. Obviously, like we just said, that poor guy doesn't survive, and there's the elderly woman as well who just sort of, I guess, passes away from, I guess it's hypothermia. It's
I think so. It's supposed to be hypothermia, isn't it? Yeah.
Or a heart attack or something like that. She's an elderly woman, but it always amazed me that they just left her. They could have taken a body with them because they're
not that far away from escaping. Yeah.
No, and even the guy strapped to the board with the broken neck. I always thought, if you're going to leave him here to drown, he's going to die. There's no way out for him. Could you not at least try to sort of?
Because they didn't even try, do they, at all?
No, because they say, right, we've got to swim underneath this thing to get into like the next room, the next part of the tunnel, and obviously you can't swim because you're paralyzed, you're strapped to a board. But it's not like a really long swim. It's
the dog does it.
Yeah, it only looks like maybe 10-15 meters at most. So you just think, well, couldn't you get like the two, Stallone and the other most able-bodied person in that group, whoever that may be, probably the guy with the daughter, or one of the younger juvenile offenders, and just at least like take him under the water and try. And if he drowns, he drowns, but at least you've tried rather than just leave him to his death. This poor guy has a.
There are some. I say it's sort of it's played up as being not so much heat because the guard makes the choice. He's like, no, I can't go. You've got to leave him behind so you can survive. So they try and play into that, but there's no attempt, is there, to argue with him? They're like, okay, we're gone. And like you say, with the old woman, they test it. I think they're trying to add a level of urgency, aren't they? They've got to keep moving forwards because the water's rising and all that sort of stuff. And obviously that pushes the rats through and all that kind of stuff, which is crazy.
I just think he could have, at least, especially a poor husband there who's like saying, I won't, he's holding on to her body saying, I won't leave. And Stallone's like, all right, if you stay, I'm staying. We'll all stay. We'll all die together. And then he sort of snaps out of it. But you just think, you could. She's not a big woman by any stretch of imagination. You could at least like drag her along and just try, rather than just leave her to be, left to sort of get swept away. It just seemed a bit much, really. But I suppose it's quite an interesting character he has, really, Stallone, this, isn't he? Because he's I think he used to be like the emergency services, like chief
captain
officer,
captain.
And obviously he's got this sort of scandal from the past which got him sacked, and now he's working as like a chauffeur or a taxi driver or something, and just happens to be about to take this couple through the tunnel when it explodes, and then obviously he leaps into action and sort of sees this as his redemption, but he is kind of making it up as he goes along, isn't he? And then at one point the lady, and Maddie, I think her name is, says to him, you never had a way out of here, did you? She says that to him when they're kind of having a reflective moment, when he's telling her why
his history.
What went wrong in the past that led to him losing his job. And she's like, you never had a way out of here, did you really? And he's like, no. You know, he perhaps in his head he even knew it might be a one-way ticket for him. He just wanted to try and go out
doing something good.
Redeemed, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting character, really.
It is, because I say, because it's interesting when you put it on that thing, because again, you sort of like, you know, he basically barges his way in, starts giving orders, and people follow them that sort of like, you know, that don't agree with him having been fired.
Yeah.
And there are cases where you go like, well, you know, letting him go in there and stuff, could you have done it different? Like, you know, could there not have been this scenario? Because they are, because the other thing as well is like the city have a discussion, don't they, about, well, we're gonna have to open the tunnel. We've got to do this. We've got to get it moving. So we've got to sort of, you know, I can't know if there's a ticking clock. I think there is, if I remember rightly. We've got to go in. We've got to open the tunnel, and if they open the tunnel, it'll mean other things collapse, which will then definitely kill them. And that's why he's sort of going in. And so you get this thing of like, he's on the side of right. They give him this justification saying, well, you know, he's like, I'm expendable. I can do this. You know, before you do this, I've got this sort of ticking clock to do this thing. But yeah, there's always this thing in my head of like, you know, if no one seems to question him at certain points, like he's challenged, but like, you know, they keep backing him up. But it sets up the film. That's the purpose, obviously. Like, but you're right. I also like the opening of this film, as they do. Like, it's a typical disaster movie. That before you get the disaster, you get the sort of like, here's the characters. So you do get, like you say, the struggling playwright and the juvenile delinquents prisoners in their bus. And that you get a bit of each of those as they sort of talk and sort of snark at each other, and then you get the old elderly couple sort of who treat their dog like a child, you know, sort of like really pander the dog, and the family that are trying to get away, and they've got they're having trouble with the daughter sort of that age where he's just a little bit of a teenager, basically.
They infer that the dad's been sort of playing away from home as well, don't they? And because he says he's like, that's in the past, you know, we're trying to move forward as a family, you know, but obviously the wife's not quite forgiven and forgotten just yet.
No. Yeah. And obviously with the guard, he's obviously got an engagement ring in his pocket, and he's about, you know, he wants to propose to her and stuff. So that's where it really sort of hits home. But even the setup of this film, like, it's cliche. Like, it is so cliche. It's so by the book in many cases, but there's something about it I absolutely love. But that car accident, when it all goes off, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think it's a pretty good setup, you know, like I say.
It's spectacular.
Yeah.
The explosion of, obviously we get, it's sort of this waste management company had taken this, like you said, this toxic waste,
whatever it is,
through the tunnel to go and sort of illegally dispose of it at a site across the river in wherever, New Jersey, wherever they're going. And obviously, at the same time, there's these thieves who rob a jewelers, a diamond store, whatever it is, and they're in a high-speed chase away. You know, obviously being pursued by the NYPD, and obviously it's their high-speed chase, which leads them to crash into one of these trucks, which blows that up. But then, as you said, it blows up the other end because the blast from the first truck blows up the second truck.
Sit through it, doesn't it?
Blows up the third truck. So it's like these sympathetic detonations, if you want to call them that blow up the entire tunnel. And when it explodes, that wall of flame just engulfs the tunnel. And the characters, obviously, we spoke about who we sort of meet and journey through the entire film. They're all in the cars, like down, below door level, because if they're not, they'll literally get incinerated. And you can see them like in the cars, and the flame is going through the cars. I mean, the CGI isn't as sophisticated as what
it's a bit
today. Obviously, it's not, this is 25 years ago, 26 years ago. But you do feel it, you know, if you watch that with the sound up. I guess that must have looked great on the big cinema screen. I didn't see it.
I was going to say, no, that's the thing. It's a proper rumble. Like, when it goes off, like you can imagine, like, it's shaking the cinema. Like, it looks, again, it's a great piece of you know, like you say, disaster cinema. It does lean on CGI, and I think, like you say, it's noticeable in a couple of places. Like you said, early CGI. You know, they've used it instead of, like, it's early sort of green screen kind of stuff, but not enough that it's sort of like it's distracting. You know, it's that thing when you go, oh, this is dated a little bit, but fine. You know, it goes on. but yeah, it's a great picture because again, it's one of the things I like about disaster films. They clearly have like there's very clear sections. It's like here's the characters, and then you go boom, disaster, right? Now let's have the obligatory sort of like gathering of the survivors, but they're all going to be at odds, so you get everyone arguing, and then it's sort of like then something happens and it brings them all together to sort of finally sort of push for survival with niggles along the way. But and again, it's all in this as well. It's all there in this. But again, I kind of like sort of like in other disaster films. In many cases, you get the similar characters, and when it's when it's that bit of everyone at odds, it's sort of like it's all a bit forced. Weirdly, with this, I kind of enjoy it because there's a couple of things going on that like feel kind of sort of like of course you would like if you've got like a relatively well-to-do elderly couple and their dog, like of course they wouldn't trust the kids off the prison bus.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And the same like when the 14-year-old, I think it's Danielle Harris, who I know from several other things, but mainly from Halloween movies in the early 90s, when she starts showing an interest in one of those criminals. I've got a daughter. Yeah. And if she did, I think I'd be the same as well. I'd be like, no, back off, chum. This is my kid. And I'd get arsey with them as well. So, and there's that sense of rising panic of, we've got to do something, but I can't trust the people. Not only am I fighting the situation, I'm fighting the people around me as well because I don't trust them. And so the dad sort of steps in to be this alpha male kind of figure. And but I like that there's a whole section there where they're sort of at odds, and it feels like well played out rather than forced.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what would happen, isn't it? You're in this literal life and death situation where it's looking pretty damn bleak, and you're just kind of thrown together. And if you're there with a bus with a load of juvenile young offenders on it, you wouldn't be like, oh, hey lads and lasses, let's sort this out. You'd be like, you stay away from me because you're in that, but you were on that bus for a reason. Yeah. Can't remember what they're all on there for, but you're not on a juvenile offenders prison transfer bus because you've done nothing wrong, kind of thing. So I'd be like, well, you just stay over there and keep away from me and my family. We'll figure this out, but we don't want to know you. We don't want to get close to you. Yeah. So it would happen, especially when things start to not go exactly swimmingly either, do they? And Stallone makes a couple of bad calls as well, and they start to turn on him as well and say, we don't want to listen to what you're saying anymore because it's literally getting us nowhere or getting us further into the shit. Well, for want of a better word. Yeah.
They also recognize him, don't they? Like his name. Someone recognizes his name. So I've read about you. Your fuck up basically cost the lives of people in the past. Like what? And then they're like, so what are you here for? Like, how have you got here? And like you say, he doesn't really have an answer other than sort of like, well, I can get you out of this. I can do this. I can that. So, as you say, like he's forcing his redemption onto this sort of scenario. Like it's a last sort of ditch effort, isn't it, to try and to bring them round?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of crazy that he gets like, I think they'd say like your credentials have been reinstated or something. It's like literally just like that, right? You're back on the force, so to speak.
Here's your badge and your gun kind of situation.
Yeah, isn't it? You get that guy who's like his replacement, who is Drake out of Aliens, who's in literally that one scene. He's the guy's replacement. He just gives him some shit because Stallone's trying to say, no, what you're about to do is wrong, and this is what he's like, nah. You're done. I'm in charge. You got fired. Get out of my tunnel, so to speak. And then literally goes in this hole and gets blown. He's dead. 10 seconds later, he's dead. So yeah, it kind of sort of you have to sort of stretch your believability a little bit to think that this guy who has literally been thrown off and fired very publicly in abject disgrace is then allowed to go, even though he's got a good idea and all the rest of it. Why they would go, all right, okay, you can go in and you can go down the tunnel in the fan and everything. Why not send one of our own in?
It's this series, as we said with Cliffhanger, it's that series of coincidences that lead the hero to that place. Yeah. But nowadays, I think even not nowadays, even in the 90s, there'd be someone from the sort of like city council, the city government going, no, Like, not only does our insurance not cover this, this is really bad that we've sort of reinstated this guy to do this sort of like, you know, mission. And if it goes wrong, we've let him do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Where's Walter Peck when you need him? You know, that pen pusher guy to come down and say, no. Yes. The red tape kind of guy who says, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you know. I mean, I suppose in a situation like that, it's just, you know, all hands to the pump, isn't it? But it's you know, and clearly he still has the respect of the people that used to work for him. There's that, you know, when he first gets there, there's an ambulance driver sort of outside tunnel, and he says something to it. Stallone says to him, "Where's the chief?" And this guy goes, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at him right now." So his people obviously were on his side as to you know what happened in the past. And there's the other guy, I can't remember his name now, but it's the guy who plays the general in Commando.
I'm going to find it. Sorry, I was looking at it's his name's Dan Hedaya. Dan
Hedaya, that's it. He's been in all sorts. I think he was in Alien Resurrection and stuff like that. And so he's there, who was an estranged friend of him, because I think it was his brother that was killed under Stallone's watch, like the year before, or you know, whenever that was supposed to have happened. So obviously he's got a degree of animosity towards him, but even he, by the end, is rooting for him, you know. So he's obviously still respected by his peers, even though, you know, he maybe deserved to get fired. Who can say?
Yeah. They don't really give you a lot of details about whatever it was, that whatever cock up he made that sort of cost them, but you get enough to know it was pretty serious.
Yeah, it was a bad call, wasn't it?
Yeah. I like we said before there about the sort of he makes the bad calls down in the tunnel as well, because again, this is that thing that we've talked about. Sort of again, like I'm liking the fact that what we've paired up in these couple of films, you know, Nighthawks and Cobra sort of worked as a tandem. I think these two films do as well.
Yeah,
is that he's not superhuman. Like, he's not coming in as a sort of like an indestructible alpha male. Like, it goes wrong. A couple of the calls he makes.
Yeah.
And he doesn't come in and just go command respect and everyone starts listening, or, you know, he punches them out or something. Like, so there's a number of occasions, like I say, the dad of the family doesn't listen, and he's sort of like arguing back about why should we listen to you, and you know, there's got to be a better way, and why have you been sent? And also Viggo Mortensen, who sort of goes up and tries to do the sort of the extreme climbing angle, and that doesn't work. So there's and obviously, like, you know, they lose people through this, like, you know, it's not like, and if it was more brutal, weirdly, I would, you know, you sort of go, that's fine, as in an exploding pipe, or you know, something that's sort of out of his control, sort of thing. But in a number of these scenarios, like, you know, when they, like I say, the old woman dies of hypothermia, like, there's nothing he could do about that, really.
No.
But as you say, there could have been a scenario where he's like, you know, damn it, I'm not losing another one. Pounds on her chest, and sort of like, you know, she comes back, and that's it for the finale. They get the elderly couple out or something. But there's none of that. Like, like you said before, like, it's pretty sort of. This isn't Cobra. This isn't sort of like, you know, Cobretti, or even like Rambo. Like, this is. You know, this is a very different character, and that's one of the things I was interested to do this from a Stallone point of view, because I think he does, especially in the 90s, explore this idea of being these other characters, and that's why I think he's you know, he is such a good actor.
I agree. I think in general, it's the mood of the time as well, because I think by this time, moving into the late 90s, into the 2000s, you're seeing that sea change away, aren't you, from the dying embers of the 80s action star, or the 80s, the type of 80s action star, you know, the huge muscle-bound, indestructible, without fault kind of kick-ass guys who don't get it wrong and win every time. You're kind of moving away from that in general, aren't you? And you're seeing these more everyman type characters, and then obviously, like, different style of actors become action heroes, don't they? Like we just said before, Nick Cage obviously becomes a huge action star in the years immediately after this. You get people like John Travolta doing action films.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves.
You know, not your typical action stars with that look that had been the look for the past sort of decade and a half. So his sort of taking on this role reflects the mood of the industry, I think, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a thing behind this, which is like, you know, we get into a whole load of things. But like, you're right. I mean, the thing is that I mean, the action genre, of course, it sort of comes out of cop films of the sort of the same, you know, westerns and then cop films and other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, you know, I pin it on 1982. We talked about Nighthawks last episode. And that was 1981.
Yes.
1982. There are three films that, well, in fact, I would say four, but there are three sort of main films that kick off the action, sort of this idea of action cinema. And it's First Blood, the first Rambo film.
Yep.
Conan the Barbarian.
Yes.
And 48 Hours.
Right, yeah, the buddy of it sort of genre, yeah.
So 1982 is this incredibly, you don't want to throw in there, weirdly, is Wrath of Khan, the Star Trek film.
Yeah.
Simply because they've gone so left turn with the Star Trek, that is very much a sort of a revenge action space. You know, it's closer to being sort of like Master and Commander, but that's different angle. But those films, especially sort of First Blood, and Conan in particular, sets up this model for the action hero for the next sort of decade.
Yeah.
Of this sort of like, it's John Milius who directed that, was really sort of leaning into sort of Nietzschean philosophy of the Ubermensch, this sort of like the Superman, like, you know, he sort of,
yeah.
And it's really in Conan. There's a moment I watched Conan the other day. It's such a fucking brilliant film.
Yeah, it is.
And at one point when Valeria dies, and they put her on the pyre. And Conan sets it fire. One of his compatriots sort of starts crying, and the old sort of wizard sort of character, "Why are you crying?" He says, "Conan, he is a Sumerian. He will not cry, so I shall cry for him." So there's emotion, sort of like he's just this sort of stoic figure of a sort of like hero, and then you get this throughout. You know, this personification of that is, you know, even in Commander. Yes, he's going after his daughter, but it's all sort of like, you know, just. I'm back in action. So you get it in Commander, you get it in Cobra, you get it in Predator. Predator is probably it's just a fucking bunch of them. You know, it's just a bunch of sort of like Nietzschean warriors in the jungle off against the Predator of the alien. Like it's so 80s. And it really oddly becomes completely, it falls apart with Die Hard. Die Hard is the thing that sort of puts a bit of a stop to this, when they're like, oh no, you've got the everyman. And then they start to take the fun out, make fun of it in Last Action Hero, which I think is a massively underrated film and you know, worth talking about one day. And so that's where all of a sudden you start to see Stallone in particular leans into other things throughout the 90s, and that's when you get, like, unfortunately, Oscar and Stop and My Mom Will Shoot. But you know, you also get these films, Cliffhanger and Daylight. You also get Copland and you know, yeah. So you know, I think he sort of leaned into this thing of like, I can't just be John Rambo all the time. I need to try something else. Schwarzenegger less so. I think Schwarzenegger sort of does it, but when you look at his catalogue of the 90s, it's still there. Like, he can't seem to get himself away from it very much. I
think he doesn't quite have
the range.
He doesn't. Well, he doesn't compared to Stallone. He doesn't, does he? Let's be truthful about
it. I love Schwarzenegger. I won't ever put him down. But you're right. No. Yeah, he hasn't got the range. And when you look at his 90s films, you know, they could easily have been made in the 80s. I think is probably the way to put it for the case of some of them.
Most definitely, yeah. He didn't move with the times, Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was kind of his own downfall, I think, in the 90s. But Stallone, you know, I think he realized that he was getting older as well. I mean, by this point, he was like 50 by the time Daylight came out. You know, he was no spring chicken, despite the fact that he's now, you know, mid-70s and still kicking ass. That's by the by, but
that's worth calling out, because you're so right. Like, he was in his early 50s or late 40s, early 50s making Daylight, and you would not consider his age as a factor in this. Like, he's hanging off shit, he's jumping, you know, doing a whole bunch of stuff. If this was me and I'm sort of about to knock onto 40, and I'd be like, nah, my back hurts, I've hurt my knees, like, I'm not doing it.
Oh yeah, I would be. Everything hurts on my body. I'd have no chance. But yeah, that's the thing. He's always kept himself in tip top.
Yeah.
Even now, he's a specimen, isn't he?
Yes.
So he can get away with playing younger than his actual age. But no, I think to give him credit, I think he's he comes across as a very intelligent man, Stallone. I think he recognised where things were going and thought that kind of stuff that's served me so well for all these years isn't going to fly anymore. No. And I need to evolve, or I'm just going to sort of fade away into straight to video obscurity or just nothingness. So
I think totally. I think
recognize.
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall. I think he saw it. He was looking at like Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme, that were going straight to the video, straight to video kind of films, and he moved away from that and made choices that I think that sort of kept him, on form. Really, I would say the early 2000s, he made, Detox, Driven, not all great.
No.
No. But the thing I'd also say about Stallone is, like you say, he is incredibly intelligent. Like, we know that he wrote Rocky and was stood by it, and he's directed a number of films. And the thing with Stallone is he's always driven his own career, and he had himself a renaissance. He sort of said, like, yeah, I'm clearly not getting the parts anymore. In the early 2000s, I'm not the star I was. What can I do? All right, well, from my point of view, I'm going to roll out Rocky. I'm going to roll out Rambo again. And
give I like what they want.
Exactly. So he tapped into that nostalgia, saw that it worked, and was like, all right, well, let's finish those off. And I think Rocky Balboa is a fantastic film. I think the Creed series is great. I do. Yeah. And more than that, though, he sort of went, well, do you know what? I do like making action films. And if no one's going to give me one, I'm going to write one. And so he creates The Expendables.
Yeah, and directs the first one.
And directs the first one. So, I won't hear a bad word about Stallone. Like, he's never won an Oscar, fine. But dude has sort of like, he's kept his career going, and he's always been at that top A-list level for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. He should have won an Oscar for Creed. I mean, he won the Golden Globe for Creed, and was Oscar nominated for Creed. Mm-hmm. He missed out. I think it was who won it. I think it was Mark Rylance that won for Bridge of Spies, the Tom Hanks film. But they should have given it to Stallone. I mean, it was the story was all there of him, coming back and winning the Oscar with his signature role of Rocky Balboa. It's a shame he didn't. But no, he it's all. What you're into, horses for courses, all the rest of it. But he is at the tip top when you're talking about action stars. I think Schwarzenegger became a bigger star than Stallone in those days. He appeared in some bigger budget films that catapulted him to absolute superstardom. I don't think Stallone was quite at that absolute superstardom level that Schwarzenegger was in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's just the way he's endured and kept everything together, kept everything going, and like you said, mixed it up a bit. Like you said before, Copland. I mean, to completely transform himself, put on all that weight and look complete 180 to how he'd always looked as this like absolute specimen of a man, to then look like this sort of out of shape, downtrodden guy, and produce such a subtle performance as well. Not an action-oriented film. All right, there's a little shootout at the end, but that's by the by. There's no action to be had in that film. It's just the performance. Among some real heavyweight actors in that film as well, and he stands up to them. I think he's probably made some wrong choices along the way that maybe his career could have had a different path or trajectory. But at the end of the day, it's worked for him, and more power to him. I hope he's still going to carry on making these films for as long as he physically can.
Yeah, I think the thing is, when you look at both, we'll talk about both, but with Schwarzenegger and Stallone, one of the things I recognise in both of them is, like you say, Stallone motto is he's recognised the changing times and he's gone with it. And I always wonder what would have happened to Schwarzenegger if he hadn't gone into politics. What would have happened for that period? But the other thing about Stallone, like, you'd also look at like all the voice work he's done. Like he hasn't just been action films. He's in I don't know if it's the Pixar one, but he's in Ants. He's in a cartoon. He plays an ant. Like he was most recently in Suicide Squad as King Shark. Like he's done voice work repeatedly. So And he was in Guardians of the Galaxy too. Like he's appeared for cameos and stuff like. So he's done. The guy sort of gets it. I think he knows how Hollywood works. He likes, and I think he's got to that point of his career where he's just enjoying himself.
Yeah, why wouldn't you at his age? Because he doesn't have to do it, does he?
No,
he must be incredibly wealthy by this point, so he doesn't have to work. A man in his mid-70s, he could just kick back and enjoy his remaining years. But he wants to be there, doesn't he?
Yeah. And the same with Schwarzenegger. He's come back, and I think one day maybe we'll do a similar retrospective for Schwarzenegger. But he's done similar things. Like he's never taken himself too seriously. Like I know he's appeared in like. He's cameoed in silly films. He did 80 Days Around the World with Steve Coogan and Jackie Chan.
Yes.
And most recently one, I don't know if you've ever seen Killing Gunther.
I have, yeah. I watched it a few weeks ago. Yeah, he's very funny in that. Very funny.
Yeah. So like, I know that these guys, I think these Asian action stars have gone sort of like, yeah, we can't do that stuff, but I can do this, and this is funny. So fair play to him. But we will do a Schwarzenegger one because there's a couple of goodies in there I think worth throwing in. But yes, anyway, but we'll finish off on Daylight because I think we've talked about a lot of things, but Daylight, I think let's do some final thoughts really, before we sort of round off about recommendations and stuff. But any final thoughts on Daylight?
Just that it's like I said before, it's not a typical Stallone performance. It's not a typical Stallone film, and yes, anyone could have played that role. It's not a like I said, other people were mooted for it. But it's a very solid, very well made, well directed, well produced, well acted for the most part. Mid-90s disaster movie. If that's your bag, then you're going to enjoy it. If you're looking for real outlandish stunts and things like that from you're not going to get it here. It's not that kind of movie. Like we said as well before, there's no bad guys in it. There's no fighting in it.
There's no shootouts really.
No,
right.
There's nothing. There's no punch ups. There's nothing. It's just it's a more human story about just basically just trying to survive this hideous disaster.
Yeah.
So go into it with those expectations. Don't see the name Stallone above the title and think, oh, here we go, bit of Stallone. Let's see. Let's watch the body count in this one. Again, that's not what you're going to get. So I think if people go into it knowing what it's going to be, they'll really enjoy it. Is it an all-time classic? No, but it's a very well done film, and it stands up now. It's despite its age, it doesn't look dated per se, apart from maybe some of the CGI at the start with the explosion. But other than that, I think it's well worth investing your time in if you've got the time. What do you think?
No, I agree. I think, like I say, it's less an action film and more that disaster film. It's got actiony elements, but it's more about sort of it's a disaster film. It is. It's a late 90s or mid to late 90s disaster movie. It's on par with, I'd say, Volcano. You had like Dante's Peak, with the two sort of volcano ones, and I think of Armageddon. It's the asteroid one, and so it was a bit of a thing then. But if you like those kind of films, if you like those kinds of disaster films, I think it's well worth your time. If you like 2012 or San Andreas or even like the original Poseidon Adventure or Earthquake, all those ones I'm mentioning, give it a go. This is Stallone a little bit outside of his comfort zone, like I say, rolling with the times, being something different. And it works. It works well. I think it's a really enjoyable film. It's not hard pressing you. Like, this film is not going to be sort of like, it's not going to be taxing your brain on plot. I wouldn't worry about that. You're not going to be worrying about sort of like levels of violence or anything like that. But it will. I honestly think if you like something and you are prone to these films, it will pull at your heartstrings. Like, there are moments in this where if you enjoy these characters, then it'll pull at your heartstrings. I think it's worth checking out. It's a film well worth checking out, and it doesn't get. We said Cliffhanger, is a little bit underrated, but Daylight doesn't get mentioned at all.
No.
And I think it's sad to hear, really. But anyway, that's it. So we've done our Stallone sort of like this is single film retrospectives. The last couple of episodes we've done Nighthawks, Cobra, Cliffhanger, and Daylight. 4 films. That I would recommend all four of them at this point. But I'm going to put you on the spot here, Max. I'm going to ask you a question. I think I know what the answer might be, but let's see. But we've got four films.
Mm-hmm.
You can recommend two of them. Which two do you recommend the most? Which are your top two? Let's put it that way.
Out of these four, I would have to say, I would say Nighthawks and I would say Cliffhanger. If those are the two you thought I'd come up with, I just think they stand up more now than I think the other two. Not that I dislike the other two. We've spoken about Cobra last time, and obviously Daylight just now. I've got a lot of good things to say about both of them, but I think the other two are perhaps just more slightly at a higher level than those two, if that makes sense. I think Nighthawks is just a really well done 70s, like we said, it's an 80s film, but it's a 70s sort of cop terrorist thriller. Again, not action packed, but very good, very well made, very well acted. And Cliffhanger is pure visual spectacle and thrilling stunts. And if that's what you want, that's what you'll get. Good boo hiss panto villain. I just think if I had to pick out of those four, and if I could, I'd recommend all four. But if I had to pick just two, I'd go with Nighthawks and Cliffhanger. What would your two be?
No, I would completely agree.
Right.
Although I like Daylight, and I think if I was putting an order, I think I just miss it. Yeah. Not there's something about Nighthawks that I think it has like a grittiness that I don't think it's seen enough. Like like you said, you've had to get. Is it a German version to watch? Like a German
Nighthawks, German Blu-ray, yeah.
I watched it on Prime. I rented it on Amazon Prime, so it's available. But like, there's not like a special edition of it, or there's not even like an available Blu-ray of it, which is a real shame. But yeah, there's something about it that sort of fits in that sort of 70s ethos, that sort of like Dirty Harry or Popeye Doyle or Serpico kind of thing. Like, it fits in with those. And so it's Stallone just before he becomes the action star. But it's great. I think it was a really good film. And the same, like you said, with Cliffhanger. Like the Cliffhanger is probably, I'd say, 90s action, I think, gets a bit of an gets underrepresented. But it's probably, I'd say it's a staple of 90s action. I'd even say it's probably in the sort of top, I don't know, about 5, but it's definitely up there. I think Cliffhanger is one of the best action movies of the 90s.
Definitely it's up there with when you think about the big ones from that decade. It might not roll off the tongue as much, like you said, as some of the others of the time, but yeah, it's up there, definitely.
Just the cinematography, I think, puts it head and shoulders above some of the other films that probably get mentioned more often, which is great film, really well worth watching, and really worth going back to as well. So but Max, anyway, thank you so much for going on this little Stallone voyage with me. I think it's been amazing. I've really enjoyed it.
No, pleasure's been all mine. Thank you for having me on.
No, so we will. I think we are going to do at some point in the future. We will definitely do a Schwarzenegger version. We'll pick 4 Schwarzenegger films, not non-franchisey ones, and which is weirdly easier for Stallone, for Schwarzenegger. Didn't do many sequels.
No. Only Conan and Terminator, I think, are the only 2 roles he's come back to, isn't it?
Yeah. Although I did find out earlier as well, not only is there a Hard Target 2, there's a Kindergarten Cop 2 that Dolph Lundgren did. So,
Yes. Yeah, I've never seen that, Gem. I don't think I ever will.
no, it's not one in my watch list, I have to admit, not something I'm racing to see. But yes, we will definitely do a Schwarzenegger mini retrospective. So I think it'll be well worth some underrated maybe, but underrepresented Schwarzenegger films, and we'll talk about those. But anyway, Max, let everyone know where they can find you, where they can hear you, and what you're up to, and they can check it out.
You can find me on Twitter at Maxi Byrne. That's spelled MAXYBYRNE. If you go there, there's links to sort of the different sites I write reviews and comic book reviews and articles for. You can also check out my podcast, Mandatory Marvel and DC, which is on the Comics in Motion network feed. If you just type that into your podcast, catching out Comics in Motion, it'll come up on there. There's something It's a litany of shows on that network. Mine's just one of them. There's loads. There's something dropping every day, all different kinds of stuff, pop culture related, whatever you're into. You'll probably find something there that's right up your alley. So by all means, check that out. And the Twitter page for that is @ComicsInMotionP. If you go there, it tells you what's going on. So check those two out, say hello, and all good stuff.
Do it indeed. And as you say, right below in the notes will be links to all of those as well. So go say hello to Max and go check out the Comics in Motion P network. Their podcast, I don't know, say plethora of podcasts on that network is absolutely fantastic. Some really good content. But from my point of view, if you want to come talk to us, if you want to talk to either of us, like I say, you know how to get hold of Max to talk Stallone. I'm sure he'd enjoy doing that. If you want to come find me, you can find me at 20th Century Geek on the Twitters. And then if you've got all the other platforms, all those other social medias, just look for 20th Century Geek. I'm on there, and you can come and find us and talk about action movies. But if you like what we're doing on the show, you enjoy what we're doing, you want to tell us, go to your podcast catcher, your podcast streaming service, whatever you use, and put a review in there. Tell us what you think, 4 stars, 5 stars preferably, but go and tell us. All those reviews help us get up the charts, let people know who and where we are. And finally, if you really like what we're doing and you want to help us keep the lights on in 20th Century Towers, we have a Patreon. That's at Patreon/20CG Media. We do a whole bunch of stuff on there. We've got a weekly podcast about the Twilight Zone, which I'll do with Julian Darius from my other sister podcast, Stories at Time and Space. I do a monthly podcast called 30-Minute Thoughts and a whole bunch of other bits and pieces and behind-the-scenes stuff and chats and all kinds of things. So go check that out. Really appreciate everyone that does that. So, ladies and gentlemen, and Max, thank you very much for joining us on the show. And we shall talk again soon.